Hi, Dr. Mendez, and welcome to the GI Health Summit. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Chef AJ. I'm thrilled to be here and share with you guys all about digestive health and how to optimize your health and your gut microbiome through a plant-based nutrition.
I would so appreciate that, Dr. Mendez, because so many people I talk to want to eat healthier. They want to eat a plant-based diet, but they say they can't for all sorts of digestive reasons. Could you please shed some light on that?
Yes, absolutely. So the digestive issues are very complex and very broad. I have patients that come with all sorts of issues, from anything from acid reflux, heartburn, to constipation, and really it all boils down to their lifestyle. And the most important aspect of their lifestyle is really their nutrition. You know that we live in a society that is constantly consuming processed foods and high-fat foods and not enough fiber. In fact, 97% of Americans are not consuming enough fiber. Fiber really is the fuel behind our gut health. Fiber is what strengthens our digestive system so that it can really thrive and be able to digest nutrients at its optimal way and keep the rest of our body in tip-top shape. I may be biased because I'm a gastroenterologist by training, but I do believe that what we put in our bodies in the form of food and really everything that surrounds us affects our gut. And health begins and so does disease. Starts in the gut. And really that has been my experience through my specialty. Really, the gut microbiome, as we find out more and more about the gut microbiome, we see that it's a role that it's playing a role in everything from heart disease to renal disease to obesity, diabetes, and even cancers. The gut microbiome is involved in. The gut microbiome resides in our colon, and it's trillions of these microbes, different types of microbes, viruses, bacteria, funguses, and they play this essential role not only in digesting food, but they themselves create a lot of different enzymes that break down the food that we eat. So when somebody tells me, I have issues eating fiber or certain plant-based foods, that what they're telling me is there's an imbalance in my gut microbiome that happened along the way, and that imbalance is causing these gut issues.
Wow, thank you. Did you want to share your presentation with us?
Yes, definitely.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. I'm so excited.
So I'm going to share right here. So today we're going to talk about nutrition and digestive health. So we're going to start by talking about the digestive system and its role as an endocrine organ and in its immune function. The gut microbiome, as we alluded to, different migration studies in health, digestive disorders, just like we were just talking about, and how to optimize your health in the gut microbiome. So first, some definitions. First, we're gonna talk about prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. So everybody has heard about probiotics. Those are the life cultures people consume routinely through supplements and foods, right? But people don't know about prebiotics and postbiotics. Prebiotics are plant foods, fiber-rich foods that we consume. Those are in turn foods for the microbes in our gut. And then postbiotics are the different byproducts or the different enzymes that these gut microbes produce themselves when we feed them fiber. The digestive tract really is a large endocrine organ with more than 30 hormonal genes, and the intestine itself produces more than 30 neurotransmitters. These communicate with the brain. So we've learned a lot about the gut-brain axis and how, anything from mental disorders to Parkinson's disease and even dementia really can start in the gut microbiome. And what a lot of people don't know is that a lot of of our immune system actually resides in our gut. So 70% of our immune cells are found in our intestine. So when we say we want to optimize our immune system, especially during this time of, an international pandemic, then we really have to start thinking about what we're putting in our gut. And then we know that the digestive system is intimately involved with other organ systems, right? Because what we eat, those different foods get broken down and then they travel throughout the body. So our body is essentially its own ecosystem. Just like when we go to a forest, we see all sorts of animals and insects and plants. Our body is its own ecosystem as well. So as I was alluding to, we have trillions of microorganisms in our body in the forms of viruses, bacteria, fungi, and archaea and microbial eukaryotes. And actually, we have 150 to 200 times more microbial genes than human genes. So in terms of genes, humans are only actually 1% human and 99% microbes, which is crazy to think about, right? And although there is similarity amongst humans, each of us has our own microbial composition, so our own unique microbial or gut microbiome fingerprint. In terms of evolution, and I'm sorry for this was a Spanish translated presentation. So in terms of evolution, microbiota have lived with us throughout time, and that they have evolved with us. So in times of famine, they adjusted themselves, and in turn, were able to digest different foods. So they've really been with us throughout time. And what are some of the functions of the gut microbiome? Really has so many functions, and these are just the ones that we know as of yet. But every day, every year, we're finding out a lot more. So the gut microbiome defends against pathogenic microorganisms. It regulates our immune system, degrades toxic compounds, digests food that we can't. So a lot of the foods that we eat, especially high fiber foods, humans only have a certain number of enzymes to be able to digest those high fiber foods. All the other enzymes are produced by the gut microbes. So if we don't have the right combination of gut microbes, then we're really at a disadvantage when it comes to consuming these high fiber foods, because we won't be able to digest them ourselves. And that's really the foundation of why a lot of people have gut issues digesting fiber-rich foods. They just don't have the right microbiome to be able to digest it. So we haven't strengthened their microbiome. We have to strengthen it. And how do we do that? We'll get to later. So the gut microbiome also synthesizes essential vitamins like vitamin K, folic acid, amino acids, and produces beneficial products such as short-chain fatty acids. So remember this term, short-chain fatty acids, because really this is a gold mine when it comes to regulating inflammation in the body. So how does our gut microbiome even develop? So studies have shown that it actually starts when the baby is in the womb, and there's a cross contamination of the mother's gut microbiome into the placenta, and that's really the baby's first small dose. But then at birth is that big first dose of microbiome crossing over to the baby. When the baby passes through the birth canal, or if it's born by C-section, that skin contact and then breathing the air, that's its first real big dose of gut microbiome. And then it continues to develop through breastfeeding and formula feeding. We know that vaginal delivery does have good outcomes in terms of transplanting the gut microbiome into the baby. It just creates a greater diversity of microorganisms. And also, we know that breastfeeding, and here there's a typo, but breastfeeding really also creates a lot more diversity. So breast milk is magic. It not only contains live cultures, but it also contains complex carbohydrates that act as those prebiotics we alluded to. So it has prebiotics and probiotics. So breastfeeding really is this magical formula. And then when the child is 2 to 3 years old, their gut microbiome is already matured and resembles that of an adult. So the early lack factors that affect the gut microbiome are many, but some positive influencers that really optimize your gut microbiome, as we alluded to, was being born vaginally, breastfeeding, and things like having pets and good maternal health. Now, negative influencers are poor health during pregnancy, C-section, receiving antibiotics around birth or within the first couple of years of birth, and formula feeding, and any kind of trauma in life as well. So how does our gut microbiome work, right? Because it's this huge monster, these trillions of microbes. So how exactly do they work? So this is what we know so far. They work in a way that they actually are able to digest foods that we provide them. So for example, when we eat fiber-rich foods like plant foods, whole plant foods, these microbes, they are actually able to synthesize short-chain fatty acids. So short-chain fatty acids are these magical byproducts from the microbes that circulate our body, and they bring down inflammation. So short-chain fatty acids, if we could bottle that up, and I'm sure people are trying to, is this magical formula. So what about, if our microbes can be good and they can create these good products, can they be bad as well? So absolutely. So we can have bad bugs that are actually pro-inflammatory. So the good bugs bring down inflammation and the bad bugs increase inflammation, right? And we're always going to have bad bugs. So what we want to do is bring a balance of more good bugs to bad bugs, right? More good bugs, because the only way to really get rid of all the bad bugs would be to take antibiotics, but that would also get rid of the good bugs, and we don't want to do that. We just want to empower the good bugs. So as I was mentioning, short-chain fatty acids are this magical byproduct of our microbes, and they are actually the main source of energy for the cells that line the interior of the colon. And they help regulate various processes, such as protecting that mucus layer that lines the intestine. They're responsible, they have a role in fat deposition, as we said, inflammation, and in regulation of the immune system. They even travel, to the brain, they travel to the lungs, and they are really helpful in terms of bringing down inflammation. So if the good bugs have these byproducts that are called short-chain fatty acids, what do the bad bugs have? They have this product, an inflammatory product called TMAO, trimethylamine oxide. So in Western diets that are high in saturated fats and low in whole plant foods, low in fiber, when we consume a standard American diet, a standard Western diet that is processed, high in fat, high in animal protein, it stimulates the production of these pro-inflammatory cytokines that are called TMAO. And for example, TMAO is produced when we ingest red meat, supplements, or energy drinks, and when we ingest red meat, liver, and eggs and dairy. So these two different products, L-carnitine and choline, come together, and they produce TMAO from these animal foods and processed foods. TMAO has been associated with all sorts of diseases, and again, we're just scratching at the surface of everything that is actually happening in our gut, but they've been associated with increased risk of diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, chronic kidney disease, and many others. So how does this all come together? So our colon is lined. So our colon is part of the immune system. And we said that 70% of the immune system actually resides in our gut. So how does that happen? Well, that immune system is part of the innate immune system, and it's made up of physical barriers such as the skin, our digestive tract, and different tracts such as the mucus layers lining our airways. Our microbiota helps protect us through the creation of a mucus layer that lines our intestinal wall. So they really are responsible for that mucus layer. And that wall is made up of these cells and these tight junctions that keep these cells together. And they form a seal from the outside world. Our intestinal flora lives there in that internal lining of our intestine and reinforces that cell wall, in addition to producing that mucus layer. So it kind of serves as an interface between the rest of our bodies and our gut. When there's a disruption there, right, either when we say we don't have a good balance in our good bugs to our bad bugs, then we're actually disrupting that mucus layer. We're disrupting those tight junctions and that seal, and we're allowing cross reaction between the environment, everything we consume, and our bodies, which shouldn't happen. It should really be modulated and moderated by these microbes, right? So what is dysbiosis? So dysbiosis is that imbalance that we were referring to, when you have an imbalance in your good bugs to your bad bugs in your gut microbiome. So how could it occur? It could occur through a whole host of ways. It could occur through, issues in different lifestyle practices. Poor nutrition, medications have been associated with creating this dysbiosis, environmental toxins. So the pathogenic bacteria, these microbes take power and create an imbalance. And if you see this picture, you see that there's this functional barrier and these tight junctions, and when they should be together very tightly and really keeping bad stuff out of the body, if there's a disruption in that, then microbes and other pathogens, chemicals, and different toxins can go into the body. And that is what we think is the rise of certain conditions, especially things like autoimmune disorders, inflammatory bowel disease, and really a whole host of other diseases. So it's this disruption of our intestinal layer through the loosening of the tight junctions, which in turn allow these harmful microbes and their products to enter our body through the bloodstream and our lymphatic tissue. So this can really disrupt our immune system, right? So if we don't have a strong gut keeping bad stuff out, then our immune system is always on overdrive, and it's trying to fight that whatever's happening in the gut, whatever's coming in through the gut. So people who have, like, let's say, a hyped up immune system, that's actually really bad, because one, that means the body is on high alert and it's trying to attack different things, but it doesn't know what to attack, and then it ends up attacking the wrong things. So we want our immune system optimized, not too high, not too low. And really our gut microbes are in charge of keeping that seal in our gut and helping our immune system out. So, for example, a Harvard study published in the journal Nature in 2014 showed that a change in diet was quickly reflected in the person's gut microbiome, especially in days. So we were saying, how these highly processed, this standard Western diet can really disrupt and cause a dysbiosis, that imbalance in our gut microbiome. So this was actually proven in this Harvard study where they fed people a diet rich in animal protein, and they saw that even within a matter of a couple of days, their microbes changed to the bad microbes. And with the animal-based diet, they had an increase in certain bacteria called Bilophila woodsworthia, which is associated with increase in bile acids, saturated fats in the diet, and the growth of organisms capable of triggering inflammation in the colon, similar to inflammatory bowel disease. But what's the good news? A change to a high fiber, whole plant-based diet actually reversed that whole microbial change that they saw in the gut. So the good news is that, a weekend or a day of eating poorly is not really it's gonna create a change, but it's not gonna create a lasting change. What you have to do is look at your entire, pattern of lifestyle, of nutrition, and if you're having more than, like, let's say 70 to 80% good lifestyle practices, good nutrition, low in processed foods, low in saturated fat, low in animal products, you're gonna have better outcomes. So what's the goal? By feeding our gut microbes processed and animal foods and not enough fiber-rich foods, we're creating a hostile environment within our gut and a breeding ground for inflammation and inflammatory diseases and disease-causing microbes. Like we mentioned, our gut microbes thrive on fiber and plant-based foods, so plant fiber is really the best food source, and we're just not getting enough of that in industrialized nations. So what are some of the diseases associated with these microbial imbalances? So there's a lot, actually. Anything from gallstones, gallbladder stones, fatty liver, heartburn, acid reflux, dyspepsia, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, inflamed bowel, which is inflammatory bowel disease, constipation, diverticulosis, cancer of the stomach and the colon. Those have all been associated with this dysbiosis or imbalance in the gut microbes. So even things like food allergies, right now we're seeing a lot of kids have tons of food allergies, something that when I was growing up, we never even saw, right? None of my friends had food allergies, and all of a sudden kids have allergies to nuts, to different types of nuts, to, I don't even know, wheat, all these different things. So what's happening? What caused that? So we know that the intestinal epithelial layer houses many of our body's immune cells. And then there's different cells, such as regulatory T cells, let's call them TREGs, T regulatory cells. They function, they create the normal function of the digestive system. And certain bacterial species such as Clostridia and Bacteroides together, they promote these T regulatory cells. So good microbes promote these T regulatory cells that are in charge of keeping our immune system where it should be. When we don't have enough T regulatory cells, we lose tolerance to protein in the diet, which can lead to different types of allergies. So when there's a disruption in these T regulatory cells through a disruption of our gut microbiome, we actually have a reaction, an immune reaction to different proteins in our diet. And when we're talking about proteins, it could be anything, right? It could be something such as really, it could be anything. So, for example, a lot of people develop different food allergies after taking a course of antibiotics, and that makes sense, right? Because when we take antibiotics, and yes, antibiotics are life-saving, and thanks to antibiotics, we are able to live a long life and not die from things such as pneumonia. But there is an overuse and a misuse of antibiotics, and a lot of people, they have the common cold, which we know is triggered by a virus, and then they ask for antibiotics. So it's both overprescribed by physicians, patients themselves ask for a lot of antibiotics, and we know that antibiotics are being used in animal feeds, it's in our water systems. So it's actually estimated by the age of 50, people have consumed over 30 rounds of antibiotics, if you think about it. That's insane, insane. So antibiotics are everywhere, and we know that they get rid of your good microbes and your bad microbes. So they're really causing a dysbiosis and an imbalance in your gut microbiome. So after a course of antibiotics, we see a lot of issues, not only digestive issues, but we also see food allergies arise. So in terms of our gut microbiome, what is within our control and what isn't? So we don't have control over our genetics, correct? We don't have control over the body we were given or we were born with. We usually don't have control over how we were born versus C-section or vaginal. And we don't have control over getting older or aging, but we do have control over our lifestyle factors. We have control over the medications we use for the most part, let's say 90% of the time, and we have 100% control over the supplements we take. We have control over our nutrition, our exercise, our stress, and whether we practice mindfulness as well. And all of these affect our gut microbiome. So Pete, I get this question asked a lot, and people ask me, is gluten healthy or not? So this is a great question, right? And I'm sure it comes up all the time. So only 1 to 2% of the population actually has celiac disease. This is a genetic disorder, and it's diagnosed with a biopsy to your small intestine. But we see that tons of people are going gluten-free because they sense that they have some kind of gluten intolerance. So what is actually happening there? So this gluten intolerance can be seen in a lot of foods. We know that wheat and gluten-containing products are usually very processed in the forms of energy bars, in the forms of highly processed breads, and tons of foods. So we believe that it's actually, since only 1 to 2% of the population has celiac disease, what's actually happening with the other people is that they're consuming too many processed foods, and that's when they remove the processed foods, that's when they actually feel that they get better. And it's actually from all the additives, including emulsifiers, oils, and different components in processed foods, but also because wheat products are very are usually GMO. They're genetically modified, and pesticides are usually sprayed on them a lot. So that is also causing a disruption in the gut microbiome. There have been studies regarding that. Now, another component in gluten products is fructans. And we actually have a study, let me see if I have it here, where people were fed, so this was a blinded study, so the people didn't know what they were consuming. So they were just told that they were consuming, I think it was like an oatmeal bar or some kind of energy bar. And what they were actually giving them was 3 different types of bars. So one group got the fructan bar, another one got the gluten bar, and another one got the placebo bar. And if you actually see to the right, so gluten wasn't associated with any gastrointestinal symptoms, but what was actually causing these symptoms were fructans, which are in gluten-containing products. So people are demonizing gluten and gluten-containing products when, in general, we know that gluten, such as found in wheat, rye, and barley, in the form of whole grains have been associated with all sorts of positive outcomes, anything from cardiovascular health to prevention of diabetes, obesity, decrease in risk of mortality, and they're associated with longevity. The blue zones groups, which are all these regions throughout the world that have very long lifespans where they're thriving into old age, they consume a lot of grain products, but they consume them in a way that it's a whole grain product, minimally processed, and we see that they have very, very positive associations with whole grains. So, should we be avoiding whole grains? Avoiding whole grains and whole wheat products is actually associated with negative health outcomes. In controlled studies, we've shown that subjects who replaced refined grains with whole grains saw an increase in short-chain fatty acids, this magical byproduct of the microbes, and a decrease in pro-inflammatory bacteria. So when we actually remove gluten products from our diet, we're actually not feeding these microbes that thrive on whole grains, and we are really shortchanging ourselves into not diversifying our gut microbiome by limiting the consumption of whole grains. And as I mentioned, whole grains have been shown to maintain a healthy digestive system, prevention of cardiovascular problems, diabetes, obesity, decreased mortality, and they are associated with longevity. And these are just some of the studies. There's many, but these are some of the studies that actually show this benefit by consumption of whole grains. So if somebody has a problem with what they believe is whenever they consume wheat or gluten products, they really need to go to a specialist who can actually diagnose what's happening. Because if they go through life not really knowing what's happening, one, they could be not consuming these really beneficial nutrients in the form of whole grains, when all the problem was actually that they had this microbial imbalance, a dysbiosis in their gut, but also they're not being diagnosed with something like celiac disease, which if you do have cross-contamination of gluten-rich products, you could potentially develop lymphoma of your body. So we really need to make sure that we're going to a specialist, getting diagnosed appropriately, so that we can actually either, if we just have an intolerance to wheat, we could strengthen our gut microbiome and really be able to tolerate wheat in the future, or we get diagnosed with celiac disease and we know we can't consume wheat. That's okay. We consume other non-gluten containing products. So is dairy healthy? We know that there has been a huge, throughout time, right? In the last 50 years, a huge push for dairy products. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. Consumers don't know whether dairy is healthy or it's not. So we're gonna define dairy products as any animal-based milk products, such as cheese, butter, milk, and we're gonna clarify some myths. Why is dairy bad? So one, dairy is very high in saturated fat. Dairy as an animal product has hormones such as estrogen and insulin growth factor, and these have been associated with different types of cancers. And dairy has lactose. We know a lot of people are lactose intolerant, and it has casein, and casein has been associated with cancers as well. So myth number one, dairy is essential for calcium and bone growth. That's completely incorrect. We know that dietary calcium intake is not the best determinant of bone health. And large meta-analysis showed that countries with higher dietary calcium intake actually from milk products actually had more bone fractures. And second myth, dairy will help your intestinal issues. Actually, dairy is the number one thing that I remove from my patients at our first visit, because it's associated with all sorts of issues, anything from heartburn to bloating, constipation, and even diarrhea. And it's been associated with conditions such as eosinophilic esophagitis, which is an inflammation that can actually start in childhood and be very debilitating for kids, microscopic colitis, and inflammatory bowel disease. And we know that children, adolescents, and adults in Western societies suffer from constipation at alarming rates. And once we remove dairy, we really see an improvement. Also, acne has been very associated with dairy products. So myth number three, dairy is healthy. Obviously, that's wrong. Cow's milk products have been associated with anything from infertility, premenstrual symptoms, polycystic ovarian syndrome, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, breast, lung, ovarian, and prostate cancer. So dairy products have even been shown to be linked to premature death. So we know that dairy products are not healthy. We know that they are responsible for a lot of the different diseases that are ailing our societies today. And we really have to be wise when we watch a commercial or read something in the news, and be very discerning of what we pay attention to when we consume products and when we choose to buy products. So people say, how about if I do lactose-free milk? Am I still, is it still bad? Yes, absolutely, because you're just removing that protein from the milk, that sugar from the milk. So you're still getting the hormones, you're still getting the saturated fat, you're still getting the casein. So you're actually getting all the other host of issues, which are actually more alarming than the lactose itself. So I love to include this in the presentation because it really puts into perspective what happens. We know that this country was founded by immigrants, and we have a lot of different populations that come from all over the world. They choose to live in the United States, and there have been these very large migration studies that show that when you actually move to a Western or industrialized nation, you actually lose a lot of your microbial diversity. Microbial diversity is key when it comes to gut health and overall health, because when we have a whole host of microbes, like we mentioned, we're always going to have the bad guys, but if we have a bunch of good guys, they're really going to be keeping the bad ones at bay. So microbial diversity has been associated with improved health in general. When we move to places that are more industrialized, more westernized, we know that our diet changes dramatically. We go from diets that were typically higher in plant foods, whatever was grown nearby, to diets that are more processed, higher in animal protein and animal fat. And that has been associated with a loss of microbial diversity, which is essential for health. So in migrating, you're typically changing to a more inflammatory diet. And here's just a slide showing that as we industrialize countries, then we started to see cases of inflammatory bowel disease, which is ulcerative colitis, or UC. We think that this association largely has to do with our change in diet and in convenience foods. So this pro-inflammatory diet has an impact on the microbiota, since it allows different types of strains to develop, different batch strains which are associated with health problems such as metabolic syndrome, obesity, and cardiovascular disease and diabetes. The opposite was also true. Conversely, a plant-based diet tends to have more dominance of the good strains in that are beneficial for health. So this study was really interesting. So this study that was published in Nature Communications actually took two groups: African Americans living in the United States, obviously, and rural Africans. And they did studies on their gut microbiome in each of those populations. So the rural Africans were dominated by beneficial gut bacteria, and the African Americans were dominated by the negative gut microbes. So what did they do? They switched their diets. And they gave the African Americans the rural African diet, which is high in things like tubers, starchy vegetables, and plant foods. And the African American diet was, which was typically high in processed foods, high in animal unsaturated fat. They fed them the high fiber foods. So they crossed their foods. And what did it show? They showed that fiber in the diet has a protective effect. It increases the production of different types of short chain fatty acids that we know are very beneficial, and that are beneficial at keeping things like colon cancer at bay and decreasing the risk of colon cancer. So what else? Migration, and they also said as one of the results that migration to Western countries are associated with the loss of microbial diversity. So this is two completely different studies showing that we lose diversity of our gut microbiome as we migrate to more industrialized nations, and our nutrition changes to more processed, more convenient foods and higher in fat. And in turn, it causes more inflammatory markers to rise in our body. So this is kind of the same. So non-affluent countries, they are exposed really early on to a diversity of microbiota and pathogens. They tend to have, we're generalizing obviously, but they tend to have a more plant-forward nutrition style, as opposed to affluent countries where we know, we're very hygienic, everything is super washed, but we also have a very inflammatory diet. So that combination is not good. It leads to loss of immunotolerance and the rise of autoimmune conditions and food allergies, as we previously discussed. So how about medications? So medications, there was a recent study actually 6 months ago or 8 months ago that studied 41 different medications. And of those 41 medications, 18 common medications were associated with causing disorders of the microbes, of the gut microbiome. So what were these? PPIs, these are things like omeprazole, pantoprazole, Prilosec, all these antacid medications. Metformin, we know, is one of the first medications given in diabetes. Antibiotics, so commonly used. Laxatives, everybody has constipation and they use laxatives. Steroids are prescribed very often too, and antidepressants. And all of these were associated with changes in the gut microbiome. What about supplements? I get this question all the time. People love to ask, should I be supplementing? Is that gonna, they think that's good. So that is a very important topic to discuss when it comes to health in the gut microbiome, because when we consume supplements, supplements are not FDA regulated with the same rigor as prescription medications. So when we're consuming them, we really don't know what we're putting in our body, and it's up to independent agencies to really declare whether, they basically regulate themselves, and we can go to independent agencies and see if it has been reviewed and whether the supplement has been deemed to be giving you what it says it's giving you, whether it's low in heavy metals and things like that. But when we consume supplements, we really have to be discerning about what we're consuming and really discuss it with a health provider so that we can be informed and have guidance. In general, I recommend supplements if you're deficient or you risk deficiency. That's my recommendation. And a lot of providers in my realm of medicine are also being very wise about supplement consumption. Now, the other question we get very often is probiotic supplements. Are they good? Are they bad? Should we be consuming them? If the gut microbiome is so important, why wouldn't we consume, why wouldn't we try to strengthen it with a pill? So this is a great topic. And actually our society just released its widespread guidelines this past week regarding the use of probiotics, and they were very careful in what they wrote. So first of all, they don't recommend use of probiotics just to use them. Nobody should be using them just to use them. So when should we use them? And I'll explain why. When should we use them? If you are taking antibiotics, you can consider taking probiotics, but it should be discussed with your health provider. When we talk about these probiotics, we're talking about probiotic supplements. Probiotic foods are a whole different realm, and those I do promote because they come from foods and they're natural. But probiotic supplements, at the end of the day, they're still supplements. So they really limited their recommendations to one condition when you're a newborn. Another one was possibly when you're taking antibiotics, and another one was for patients with inflammatory bowel disease who have had a resection of their gut and they actually have a pouch. So very limited guidelines. And even the ones, even the guideline that said, you know, discuss it with your physician if you're taking antibiotics and when you want to consume a probiotic, that was a low quality evidence suggestion. So here I'm going to talk about a really remarkable study that came out about a year ago, and it showed, so it actually had 3 groups. So this study, why it was so remarkable is because all the other studies we've had about probiotics, they have tested stool. But this one actually went in depth and they did a colonoscopy. So they went to the source of the microbes. And what happened was that they tested their gut microbiome, then they gave them antibiotics to wipe out their gut microbiome. After that, they divided them into 3 groups. One group received a stool transplantation from themselves. So they had collected their stool and they transplanted it back onto them. The other group received probiotics. And the last group, the 3rd group, didn't actually receive anything. They were left to recover on their own. What was so remarkable is the stool transplantation group did the best. Obviously, if I transplant stool back into me after receiving antibiotics, I'm going to recover my stool microbiome right away. But what was the most surprising is that the probiotic group, even at the 5-month mark, they had not recovered their gut microbiome. And actually, the one that was left to recover on their own had recovered it faster. So that was really remarkable. So I still don't recommend probiotics, even when patients are taking antibiotics. It has to be individualized, patient to patient. It really has to be a decision made with your own healthcare provider, your own primary doctor or gastroenterologist. What I do is I fortify their gut microbiome before, during, and after. I do it with probiotic foods. We know we have so many probiotic foods. We have that there's really no reason not to consume it. Even people that have gut issues that they're not going to be able to eat sauerkraut, for example, we can still give them miso. We can still give them things like natto or natto, and really they tolerate it well. So when to use supplements? Supplements ideally would be amazing and great, and they will really be something that we could use along with our healthy lifestyles to promote health. But right now, we just don't have enough evidence to be able to recommend supplements just to take them. We have to be very discerning. If you are deficient in something or a risk of deficiency, you should take a supplement. And especially with probiotics, we have to be careful in terms of taking probiotic supplements, and really try to emphasize eating probiotic foods. So in terms of protein or fiber, that's one of the most common questions that I get is, well, if I start eating more vegetables, am I going to be getting enough protein? Well, nobody here, I had never had a patient who's deficient in protein. We see that in very, in countries where we are not getting enough calories, they're not there, we can see protein deficiency. If you're getting enough calories, you're getting enough protein. But what we are deficient in is fiber. And as I mentioned previously, 97% of Americans don't get enough fiber. And it shows because we have all these conditions that are associated with a low fiber diet. Things like cardiovascular disease, things like gut issues, inflammatory disorders. We are just not getting enough fiber, and fiber is that fuel that the gut needs to strengthen and to protect us from harmful toxins and to optimize our health in general. And that was in Spanish. So how do we optimize our gut microbiome? First and foremost, eat real food. Whole foods, ideally. So fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds. Those are whole foods. Increase them. And what we really want to strive to do is get a diversity of foods. Your plants should be different colors. The goal, the magic number is 30 plus plant foods per week. Really has been shown in studies to be that number that is associated with a thriving gut microbiome and gut health. So 30 plus plant foods per week. Get enough sleep. We know that lack of sleep causes inflammation in our body, causes disruption in our gut microbiome. So really we should be striving to get 7 to 8 hours of restful sleep. Try to move more. Exercise is essential. When we exercise, we're actually increasing the diversity of our gut microbiome. Practice mindfulness, de-stressing techniques. Social connectivity is very important. And now more than ever that we're isolating ourselves, we really have to maintain our social groups in whatever form we can, whether it's through, Zoom or any other medium. We want to connect with nature. Nature really provides us not only with its calming presence, but it also exposes us to the biome, right? Nature, all different environments have their own biome, or their different balances of microbes. And when we get out into nature, we're really optimizing our health. And we want to minimize and avoid toxic substances like alcohol, tobacco, pesticides. So eating organic, if you can afford it, would be great. And avoiding unnecessary medications and unnecessary supplements, always making sure that we're discussing it with our providers when we do choose to consume a supplement. So that is my presentation. I do have, a little bit more about how to transition to a plant-based diet, but I think it's good that we focus on the digestive system. So any questions you have for me?
Well, I took a bunch of notes, and this is definitely a presentation that people are going to have to watch more than once. It was really incredible. Thank you so much. Just so many mind-blowing things that we're only 1% human and 99% microbe. That's mind-blowing.
It's crazy to think about, right?
I mean, that unbelievable. You talked a lot about the short chain fatty acids regulating inflammation. Do we get these from the foods we eat?
Perfect question. So when we consume fiber from plants, not in a supplement or a powder, when we consume fiber, the microbes actually ferment our fiber into short chain fatty acids. So they turn them into something completely different. The short chain fatty acids travel throughout our body and they decrease inflammation. We've found them in the brain. We found them in the lungs. They just travel throughout, lowering inflammation.
Wow.
So what we eat is food for the microbes. So if we feed them fiber, the good microbes thrive because those are the ones that create short chain fatty acids. If we eat processed foods or high fat foods from, let's say, animal protein, then that gets turned into that TMAO byproduct that is inflammatory. And that travels throughout the body too, and it causes inflammation. So good gut microbes thrive on fiber. Bad gut microbes thrive on processed foods and animal products such as egg, red meat, liver, etc.
That's incredible, because you said that 97% of our population doesn't get enough fiber. And many people say, but when I eat fiber, I have digestive upset, I have symptoms, I have bloating, I have gas, diarrhea, I can't eat fiber. This is what I hear. I eat a lot of fiber.
Absolutely. So then what I do is I take them back from the beginning. When did they start having these digestive issues? When did they first notice that they couldn't even eat like a spinach leaf? And then sometimes it happens since they were young. And then I ask them, so what happened? Did you have trauma? Did you have to take a lot of antibiotics when you were young? So that those early childhood years really do give us an insight into health in general. And let's say it didn't happen when you were little, it happened 6 months ago. So what happened 6 months ago? Were you going through a stressful time? Did you receive antibiotics? Did you all of a sudden move somewhere where they were using more pesticides? So you have to really dig deep and see what was the source of that microbial imbalance. And then once you explain it to them, they really understand that, like, how their body works. And understanding how your body works really causes such calmness and peace in them, because then the next step is, how do we improve it? And how do we improve it is, something happened that you had this imbalance. So we have to bring back the good guys. How do we do that? Little by little, but consistently. We have to put you on an individualized program to whatever you're not tolerating now, be able to strengthen, empower those gut microbes to be able to digest the foods. So we do that very slow, but we will get there. It's just a matter of time and working with a health professional that really knows the field, because just like we know that a lot of doctors are not taught about nutrition, most GIs and most doctors are not taught about the gut microbiome. Really, we've seen this expansion of gut microbiome evidence and research coming out in the last decade. So it's exploding. So if somebody is not dedicating themselves to studying this, then they're not going to know anything about the gut microbiome, how to strengthen it, how to really go about improving these digestive symptoms in patients.
When you think about it, just a few years ago, nobody knew the word microbiome. So for somebody that's brand new, just a quick definition. What exactly is it? How does it form? Why is it important?
Yeah, absolutely. So the gut microbiome is these trillions, some people say 39 to 100 trillion of microbes in our body. And they are different parts of our body have different microbial ecosystems. So our mouth has its own, our vagina, for example, in women has, but our gut microbiome specifically means our colonic microbes. And these are viruses, bacteria, fungi, and other organisms that have been there with us, have evolved with humans through time. They start developing in the womb, and they really get that big rush of diversity when the baby is born through the vaginal canal, through C-section, etc. We know that the microbiome develops to maturity by the time a kid is 2 to 3 years old. So it actually matures quickly, fairly quickly. So those first years are essential in our gut microbiome development, whether it's antibiotics, whether it's trauma, whether it's poor nutrition. All of these are very important in that development of the gut microbiome. When we first introduce foods to a baby, some people choose to introduce foods at, let's say 6 months, then we are really causing an explosion of diversity, because before that, their microbes were really just the mother's microbes, or really just the mother's microbes. So a baby and the mother have the closest microbial species that any two humans can have. Brother and sister don't. But then when that baby starts eating, then he is going to expand his own gut microbiome and develop his own fingerprint in terms of the gut microbiome. So it develops fairly quickly in young children, and it stays pretty stable through life. There's changes, but they're not drastic changes unless you consume, antibiotics and the such.
What role does the microbiome play in our immunity?
Yeah, so as we mentioned, the gut microbiome really is responsible for keeping our colon, the wall of our colon, intact through a mucus layer that protects the body from the outside environment, but also by keeping these tight junctions between cells that keep it from pathogens or toxins coming in. So the gut microbiome, through, for example, the short chain fatty acids that we mentioned, actually keep that wall up, keep that defense system. And our gut microbiome is part of the innate immune system. And really, not the gut microbiome, the gut, and our gut is responsible for 70% of our immunity, of our immune cells.
I bet most people don't know that. That's incredible.
Absolutely.
70%. Yeah.
Right. So when you think about it, everything that we're consuming is affecting our immune system, and in an indirect way is through the gut microbiome.
Yeah, I don't think people look at it that way. I knew that exercise was important for a variety of reasons, and even some of the experts on this summit have been saying because it increases gut motility, but I never heard that it actually increases the diversity of the microbiome. That's incredible how it would do that.
Absolutely. It's fascinating, but really exercise has an important role to play in our gut microbiome. Like you mentioned, it increases microbial diversity, and diversity is key for keeping a healthy gut and a healthy immune system and body.
Wow. What about kombucha? A lot of people think, is that good for the gut?
Great question. And I actually didn't include it in my presentation. Kombucha, in theory, is great because it is a probiotic food source. However, it is very high in sugar, and really that decreases its efficiency in being a good probiotic food. So if somebody's gonna say drink kombucha instead of drinking alcohol, that's probably better. What I would recommend is that they dilute it with water or sparkling water, and just consume a little kombucha and the rest water or sparkling water. But when it comes to probiotic foods, I would really stick to the ones we know, things like miso, tempeh, sauerkraut, kimchi. There's so many others, but like kelp noodles and so many others that are great. They're actually food sources, real foods, minimally processed, just fermented, right? And they're great to include as a part of a diverse plant-based nutrition.
Great. How important is it for our gut in general and our microbiome in particular that we consume only organic foods? And what if someone can't afford it?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and we know that a lot of our communities are actually in food deserts, and food deserts are these places where people don't have access to fresh foods. They tend to be fresh foods like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, all these great and nutritious food, and they tend to be in communities that are of low socioeconomic level. The other term that I recently learned about was a food swamp, and those are places where there's a lot of different convenience stores, and there's a lot of different fast food chains, but there's no farmers market or there's no supermarkets that actually provide fresh foods. So a lot of our populations, unfortunately, are having to deal with this. A good way to approach it is to, one, look at the Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 every year. So this is if you can afford organic food, avoiding the Dirty Dozen. Dirty Dozen is published by the Environmental Working Group every year, and these are the 12 dirtiest foods, the most heavily sprayed pesticide foods that they're found that year. So it changes a little bit year to year, and avoiding those Dirty Dozen foods really does help you a ton. The other recommendation that I usually give people is to try to buy food in bulk. And things like chains like Costco or Sam's, if you have access to them, buying things like organic beans, organic grains in bulk, or like organic potatoes, really ensures that one, it's cheaper when you're buying in bulk, even though it is a little bit more from the offset that you're spending, but it will last you a lot longer. And that ensures that your staples, that your pantry is organic at least. So it does make a huge difference when you're consuming your staples, which you're going to be consuming most days of the week, and if those are organic. So buying them in bulk is a better option.
That's great. Thank you. So many people, even people that are on a plant-based diet, gas and bloating, especially when they eat things like beans and legumes. Is there any hope for them?
Yes, absolutely. There's tons of hope for those patients. So what happens is that people experience abdominal discomfort and then they avoid the food. And then they think that, oh, I avoided the food because it was causing me harm. And then they avoid it, and then they never get to strengthen that gut microbial species or group of microbes that were responsible for digesting those foods. So then what you see is actually a lowering of diversity of your gut microbiome, and then it's going to translate into you not being able to eat a lot more of those groups of foods. So let's say it was like, an apple. You're not going to be able to eat a lot of different fruits with time if you're really avoiding a certain fruit. So what we do is that we go slow, and we put them on an individualized phases where we're introducing diversity, but in a controlled environment. So I love to start with starchy vegetables because they tend to be mild on the gut. They're very easily digested. Things such as, potatoes, yams, sweet potatoes, pumpkin, all these tubers or root vegetables, starchy vegetables, they tend to be really good on the gut. I also start with smoothies. So smoothies, I always recommend that people consume them earlier in the day, because when we make a smoothie, one, it's great because we're pre-digesting the food, right? We're breaking it down with a blender. So we're pre-digesting it for them. So already their gut is going to have an easier time digesting a smoothie. But I recommend that they consume it earlier in the day, because early in the day, you've had a whole night's rest. Your gut is rested. So when you consume it, you're giving your microbes a chance to have this meal first, be able to digest that meal. But if you have it later in the day, then you're sandwiching it in between heavier meals. Let's say you had oatmeal in the morning, then you had a smoothie, and then you have, like pasta or a salad or whatever, then you're sandwiching those very highly fermentable fruit in the middle. That's going to cause a lot of gas and bloating. So I always recommend smoothies in the morning and starting with root veggies. And then based on the person, we start introducing different foods one at a time. It really is different for everybody because everybody has different food sensitivities and intolerances.
Right. So if I understand you, it's never hopeless, but sometimes it's not the quick fix that people are looking for.
Correct. It is not a quick fix. You really need to work with somebody who knows what they're talking about, but there's tons of hope for you.
Right. Well, you sound like you would be that person. I got to tell you, I'm very impressed, and it's so nice to meet you. And I just have one more question, Dr. Mendez. What is the truth about GI health?
So the truth about GI health is that everything that is around us and that we consume in our everyday lives affects our GI health. But the good news is that even within just a few days, you can cause a very dramatic and positive change in your gut. So don't lose hope, but just really strive to do those lifestyle measures that will take a little effort in the beginning, but definitely do pay off at the end.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chef AJ. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.